Why do you think the escalation of Karabakh conflict started now? Does this have anything to do with the current situation in the world?
Well, it's certainly been a very bad summer in Karabakh, and more young men have lost their lives there in the last few weeks than in the whole of 2013, which is very worrying. And I think it's particularly sad that we're seeing the death of young men who were born even after the ceasefire agreement was signed. If you're 19 years old, you were born after the ceasefire agreement is signed, and yet you're dying on the Karabakh front line. Why is it happening now? Well, I see some sort of side effects of the Ukraine crisis. The world is distracted by Ukraine, and there's, I think, increasing frustration in Azerbaijan that the Minsk process is going nowhere. And so I think we're also seeing some tensions between Russia and the West, which means that there's even less faith in the Minsk process for Karabakh. So I think, and what happened recently, well, I think we had a couple of months of bad incidents on the ceasefire line and on the border, some in places which had previously been quiet, like Nakhchivan, and that's probably more the Azerbaijani side doing that. The Azerbaijani side, it's more in their interests to shake the status quo. They're not interested in a quiet ceasefire. But how this latest kind of escalation of violence happened, I think most people agreed that there was some kind of Armenian operation which crossed the lines on July the 31st. So a bit of responsibility on both sides.
Mr. Deval, Armenia's and Azerbaijan's presidents met in Sochi. What do you think came out of this meeting?
Well, obviously we don't know the full details. We only know what happened in public, but we also know what didn't happen in Sochi. There wasn't, for example, a joint statement of the three presidents, or even of the two presidents, which I think was a bad signal. Maybe some people were hoping for some kind of reaffirmation of the ceasefire, some kind of joint statement like the two presidents signed in the Mayendorf Declaration end of 2008. All we got was some kind of general words in support of the peace process, in support of negotiations, which is good in the sense that it kind of decreased the level of violence. But the fact we didn't get a joint statement which both President Aliyev and President Sarkisyan could sign, I think still shows how deep the problem is.
Do you think Armenia and Azerbaijan are ready for peace? If yes, why can't they come to an agreement?
Well, I think unfortunately the situation is basically as it was. I don't think the sides are ready for peace. I also don't think they're ready for war. I think they're ready for a bit of kind of instability, but I don't think the Azerbaijani side, which is the more likely side to start a new conflict, wants to do that. I think that would be very dangerous, and they know it. But I also see no interest in signing a peace agreement that would involve massive compromises for both the Armenian side and Azerbaijani side, be very politically unpopular in both countries. So better to stick with the status quo, hope for a bit of movement here, a bit of movement there, a little success, but basically better to stick with the status quo than to either move to peace or war. When it comes to Russia, I don't actually see, I'm a bit different from most people, I don't really see a big new Russian role in Caucasus. I see Russia as being very focused on Ukraine, which I think consumes all Russia's foreign policy resources, all its thinking at the moment. So I think President Putin saw an opportunity in Sochi to be the peacemaker. He saw an opportunity to do something there, but it was just for one day. I don't see a new Russian policy, and I haven't seen anything from Russia since, in fact, the Kazan meeting in 2011.
As you mentioned, the sides are not ready for peace. Do you think it's important to have the pressure from outside to force the presidents to make a bigger effort for signing a peace agreement?
No, I'm afraid we have to ask maybe people often ask the question, why is this conflict not resolved? But one could ask a more rather cynical question, why should this conflict be resolved? Armenian Azerbaijani society don't really want a solution involving massive compromise. The leaders don't seem very interested. The big powers are focused more on Middle East, Afghanistan, Ukraine. So there's no sign of massive resources being put into solving this conflict. Stabilizing it, yes, trying to kind of stop a new war starting, but unfortunately we're seeing more of the same.
Considering Russia's new, more aggressive approach in the region, in former Soviet territories, do you think Russia may have a different role in Karabakh conflict? And do you think that Russia may become the only moderator in this conflict?
No, I don't think either side wants Russia to have a monopoly on the process. I think both sides like to have Russia, United States and a European power, France, in there. That provides a kind of balance. I think even Russia realizes that it's not going to have a monopoly on this peace process. It can occasionally call meetings, like in Sochi, but Azerbaijan in particular is not going to agree to a single Russian role. So we're left with the Minsk process. No one is very happy with it, but there's no big alternative either.
And prolonging the peace process, whose benefit is it serving? Azerbaijan's, Armenia's, or Russia's, or?
Well, I would say really, in the short term, people are happy, but in the longer term, it serves no one's benefit. Armenia really can't develop as a country with the Karabakh conflict, this big burden around its neck and its closed borders. Armenia really doesn't have the chance to develop. Azerbaijan has all this lost territory and also can't develop. Its main route to the west is actually via Armenia and is blocked. So I've called this conflict a kind of suicide pact. Both sides agree to sort of do damage to the other, but they prefer that than making a compromise.
What should be the US's and the Europe's role in this conflict? Are they interested enough to see the peace process? Is it that important for them, or everyone just has hands off?
Well, I think it's a second-order priority. Occasionally, it's the Secretary of State, John Kerry, knows about this conflict. His predecessor, Hillary Clinton, made 2 trips to Caucasus. François Hollande, French president, visited Caucasus. So it's they understand this issue, but I think they're waiting. They don't want to put more resources and more effort into it unless they see more positive, a green light from Baku or Yerevan. They don't really want to waste time on a process which is going nowhere. So we end up with a kind of vicious cycle, Baku and Yerevan and Karabakh saying we want to see more from international community, we want to see more from the region, and basically nothing happened.
TAP project will make Azerbaijan a potential energy partner for Europe. Do you think this will change Europe's approach to Karabakh issue? If yes, how would Russia react?
Right. Yeah. Well, I see the TAP project and Shahrdeniz and the new gas exports from Azerbaijan actually being a continuation of what we have now, because at the moment we have the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline which links Azerbaijan to the west, which means that European countries have an interest in Azerbaijan, but also they have an interest in security. They don't want to both Azerbaijan and European countries and BP have an interest in no new conflict because that could threaten the pipeline. So the oil amounts of oil being exported through the Baku-Ceyhan pipeline are going down. They were at 1 million barrels a day. They're now less than 700,000 barrels a day. But in 5 years' time, the hope is that the gas will replace oil as the major export for Azerbaijan. So gas is a bit more difficult than oil. I think it will make Azerbaijan less money, but it will continue Azerbaijan's kind of relationship with Europe, which means that Azerbaijan will still be have a kind of strategic interest in Europe, but also there'll be a strategic interest in not starting a new conflict.
Do you think that the likelihood of war is possible?
Well, I think that we shouldn't be complacent. This is not a frozen conflict when people are dying, and the likelihood grows with every year. But I still think the basic calculation is still no one wants to take that big risk to start something. But what is troubling is when more people are dying, you don't have a full-scale war, but you're still having 20, 30 young men died in the last month, so that's bad enough.